Subscribe to Story Lab for more stories. Now, let's begin this one. Chapter 1. Before the Storm. Grant Thomas had learned early that violence solved nothing until it solved everything. His father, Wilson Thomas, had taught him that distinction during long summers in Montana, where words like honor and consequences weren't abstractions, but the bedrock of how men lived. Wilson Thomas stood 6'2", even at 68, a retired civil engineer who'd built half the bridges in the Pacific Northwest. He'd raised Grant alone after Grant's mother died from cancer when the boy was 9. Wilson never remarried, never complained, never wavered. He simply built things, bridges, buildings, and a son who understood that strength meant protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. That philosophy had led Grant to Delta Force. Now 32, Grant had spent the last decade in the shadows of America's wars. He'd run operations in 13 countries, learned 5 languages, and mastered the kind of problem-solving that didn't make it into training manuals. His file was classified. His face was unknown. His effectiveness was legendary among the few who needed to know. 3 years ago, during a counterterrorism training exercise in Virginia, he met Diane Price at a coffee shop near base. She was a pediatric nurse with warm brown eyes and a laugh that made him forget, temporarily, about the darkness he worked in. 6 months later, they were married in a small ceremony in Seattle. With Wilson beaming beside his son, Diane's family had seemed fine, normal. Her parents had passed years before, leaving her raised primarily by extended family. Her cousin Cesar Gaines had been polite at the wedding, if a bit distant. Her uncle Roy Gaines, a successful businessman in Portland, had given a generous check and a firm handshake. Grant had noticed things, though. Little things, the way Cesar's eyes hardened when he thought no one was watching. The expensive suits Roy wore that didn't quite match his declared income as a restaurant owner. The hushed conversations that stopped when Grant entered rooms. But Diane loved her family, and Grant loved Diane. He'd learned to compartmentalize. The Gaines family stayed in their world. He stayed in his. Until Wilson decided to ask questions. 2 months before the attack, Wilson had mentioned something during a phone call to Afghanistan. Grant had been preparing for a night operation in Kandahar province, checking equipment in the safe house. "Son, I need to tell you something about Diane's uncle," Wilson had said, his voice carrying that particular note that meant he'd discovered something troubling. "What about Roy?" Grant had adjusted his plate carrier, phone wedged against his shoulder. "I was consulting on a bridge project in Portland. Roy's name came up in connection with some irregularities. Labor violations, possible connections to trafficking. I started asking around." "Dad, stop." Grant's tone had been sharper than intended. "Whatever Roy's into, it's not our problem. Don't go digging into Diane's family. Please." Wilson had been quiet for a long moment. "Grant, I raised you to stand for something. You raised me to choose my battles. This isn't ours. I'm asking you as your son, let it go." "All right." Wilson had agreed, but Grant had heard the reluctance. Grant had thought that was the end of it. He'd been wrong. Chapter 2. The Call. The operation in Afghanistan had been textbook. Grant's team had extracted a high-value intelligence asset from a Taliban compound outside Kandahar. 0 casualties. Complete success. They returned to base at 0300 hours local time. Grant was stripping out of his gear when his phone buzzed with an unknown number. Military satellite phones didn't get spam calls. "Thomas," he answered. "Grant, it's Marshall Miller." The voice was tight with controlled fury. Marshall had served with Wilson in the Army Corps of Engineers, later became a Ranger, and had remained Wilson's closest friend for 40 years. "You need to know what happened." Grant's blood went cold. Marshall never called, unless it was serious. "What happened?" "Your father's in the hospital. Critical condition. Someone attacked him at a family dinner tonight, one of Diane's cousins, Cesar Gaines. Smashed a wine bottle across Wilson's skull." The world seemed to tilt. Grant gripped the edge of the table. "How bad?" "Fractured skull. Intracranial bleeding. They had to drill into his head to relieve the pressure," the surgeon said. Marshall's voice cracked slightly. He said, "Wilson may never walk straight again. Possible permanent cognitive damage." Grant's mind went into operational mode. Emotions locked behind training. "Where is he?" "Oregon Health and Science University, Portland." "Listen to me, Grant, don't come back." "Not yet." The Gaines family is more dangerous than you know. Roy Gaines has half the Portland PD in his pocket, and Cesar's already claiming self-defense. They're saying Wilson attacked him first. That's impossible. My father wouldn't. I know. I was there. I saw the whole thing. Marshall's voice dropped. Wilson had been looking into Roy's business dealings. He found something. At the dinner, he confronted Roy about human trafficking connections. Cesar went crazy, said Wilson was disrespecting the family. He grabbed a wine bottle, and he didn't stop with one hit, Grant. He kept hitting him while Wilson was on the ground. It took 3 people to pull him off. Grant's hands had started to shake not with fear, but with a cold, calculated rage he'd learned to harness. Did you give a statement? They wouldn't let me. I'm emotionally involved. The detective who responded, Stan Shelton, he's one of Roy's guys. The whole thing's being buried. Cesar was released 2 hours after they arrested him. Released? Grant's voice could have cut glass. $10,000 bail. He's home right now, probably laughing about it. Grant was already moving, grabbing his go-bag. I'll be stateside in 16 hours. Grant, listen. I heard you. I'll handle it. He ended the call and strode toward his commanding officer's quarters. Major Kelvin Jennings was still awake, reviewing intelligence reports. Sir, family emergency. My father's in critical condition, requesting immediate leave. Jennings looked up, read Grant's expression, and simply nodded. Granted. You need transport? Whatever's fastest. I'll get you on a bird to Ramstein, then direct military flight to McChord. You'll be in Seattle by tomorrow evening. Thank you, sir. Grant was in the air 90 minutes later, watching Afghanistan disappear beneath the aircraft. He spent the flight not sleeping, not resting, but thinking, planning, analyzing. Cesar Gaines had attacked his father with a wine bottle. Multiple strikes, while Wilson was down. The word self-defense played in his mind like a broken record. Grant had spent 10 years learning how to dismantle enemy networks, how to identify vulnerabilities, how to strike where it hurt most. Cesar Gaines was about to learn what Delta Force retaliation looked like. Chapter 3. Homecoming. Grant landed at McChord Air Force Base at 1,900 hours Pacific Time. He called Diane from Ramstein. That conversation had been complicated. Grant, it was horrible, she'd said, crying. But Cesar said, Dad attacked him first. Uncle Roy said Wilson had been drinking and started yelling accusations. Diane, Marshall was there. He saw everything. Cesar attacked Dad without provocation. Marshall's dad's best friend. He's biased. A retired Army Ranger with 2 Bronze Stars is lying, but your cousin who's been arrested 3 times for assault is telling the truth. The silence had been heavy. Grant, please, don't make this worse. The police are investigating. The police released him on bail. He fractured Dad's skull and walked out of jail the same night. Just come home. We'll figure this out together. But Grant had heard something in her voice. Fear. Yes. But also doubt. Not doubt about what happened. Doubt about him. About what he might do. He'd ended the call and focused on the mission ahead. From McChord, Grant drove a rental car straight to Oregon Health and Science University. The hospital sat on a hill overlooking Portland, a sprawling complex of glass and steel. He found Wilson's room in the ICU at 2,100 hours. Marshall Miller was sitting beside the bed, his weathered face drawn with exhaustion. He stood when Grant entered, and the 2 men embraced briefly. He's been unconscious since surgery, Marshall said. They've got him in a medically induced coma to reduce brain swelling. Grant looked at his father. Wilson's head was wrapped in bandages, tubes running from his arms, a ventilator helping him breathe. The man who taught Grant to fish, to build, to be strong reduced to this. Tell me everything, Grant said quietly. Marshall settled back into his chair. The dinner was at Roy Gaines' estate. Some kind of family gathering. Diane had invited Wilson because she wanted him to get to know the family better. I went along because Wilson asked me to. He said he had questions he wanted to ask Roy. About the trafficking. Yes. Wilson had been doing research. Roy owns 12 restaurants across Portland and Seattle, but the money doesn't add up. Too much income, too many cash transactions. Wilson found connections to a labor trafficking ring, bringing in workers from Southeast Asia, Vietnamese, mostly. Fake papers, debt bondage, the whole operation. Grant's jaw tightened. He confronted Roy at dinner. Halfway through, after a few drinks, Wilson asked Roy point blank if he knew about workers being smuggled through restaurant supply chains. Roy laughed it off, said Wilson had been reading too many conspiracy theories. Then Wilson laid out the evidence: shell companies, suspicious transfers, workers who disappeared. Marshall paused, his hands clenching. That's when Cesar stood up. He was drunk, aggressive. Started saying Wilson was disrespecting the family, that he was calling them criminals. Wilson stayed calm, just said he wanted answers. Cesar grabbed a wine bottle from the table and swung it at Wilson's head. How many times? First hit knocked Wilson down. Then Cesar hit him 3 more times while he was on the ground. I tackled Cesar. Others pulled him off. There were maybe 15 people there. Everyone saw it. But the detective says it's self-defense. Stan Shelton showed up personally to handle the scene. He interviewed Cesar privately for 5 minutes, then announced Cesar was claiming self-defense and would be released pending investigation. I tried to give my statement. Shelton told me to calm down and that I was too emotionally compromised to be objective. Grant walked to the window, looking out over Portland's lights. Somewhere down there, Cesar Gaines was free. Roy Gaines was continuing business as usual, and his father was fighting for his life. I need contact information, Grant said. Cesar's address, Roy's businesses, everything. Marshall pulled out a folder. I figured you'd ask. Everything I could find is in here. But Grant, these people are connected. Roy has money, influence, and he's not afraid to use violence. If you go after them, they came after my family, Grant said, turning. His voice was calm, but his eyes were ice. They put my father in a coma. Now they're going to learn about consequences. What are you planning? I don't know yet. But Cesar told the police it was self-defense. Grant looked back at Wilson. He's about to learn what actual defense looks like. Marshall studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Your father taught you to stand for something. Whatever you need, I'm here. I need you to watch over Dad. Document everything medical. If he wakes up, record his statement. And Marshall, Grant met his eyes. Stay away from what I'm about to do. You've got grandkids. I don't want this touching you. Grant, please. For Dad. Marshall reluctantly agreed. Grant spent another hour at his father's bedside, then drove to the extended stay hotel he'd booked. Diane had called twice. He hadn't answered. He needed time to think. In the hotel room, he spread out Marshall's folder. Addresses, business records, police reports. Marshall had been thorough. Cesar Gaines, 29, lived in a condo in Portland's Pearl District. 3 prior assault arrests, all dismissed or pleaded down. Worked as security consultant for his uncle's restaurant group, which meant enforcer. Roy Gaines, 56, owned Gaines Restaurant Group, 12 high-end establishments, multiple commercial properties. Married to Brenda Gaines, née Gay, 2 daughters, 1 son deceased, drug overdose 5 years ago. No criminal record, but multiple civil suits settled quietly. Grant pulled out his laptop and started deeper research, using access codes that technically he shouldn't use outside official operations. But technical restrictions had never stopped him when the mission mattered. 2 hours later, he confirmed Wilson's suspicions. Roy's restaurants showed income patterns consistent with money laundering. Immigration raids at 2 locations had found workers with fraudulent documents, but charges had been dropped. A Vietnamese community advocate named Tommy Weaver had filed complaints about workers being held in debt, bondage complaints that went nowhere. But that wasn't all, Grant found. Digging through property records and shell companies, he discovered Roy had expanded beyond restaurants. Warehouses near the port, a logistics company, and buried deep in corporate filings connections to a man named Raphael Harrington, who'd been investigated by the FBI for human trafficking but never charged. This wasn't just about restaurant workers. This was a full trafficking operation, and Wilson had stumbled onto it. They hadn't just attacked his father for asking questions. They tried to silence him permanently. Grant closed his laptop and sat in the darkness, thinking. Cesar wanted to claim self-defense? Fine. Grant would show him what real defense looked like. Not by attacking him directly, that's what they'd expect. That's what they could defend against with lawyers and corrupt cops. No. Grant would do what he did best. Dismantle the entire network from within. Take away their power, their protection, their freedom. And when they had nothing left, when they were vulnerable and exposed, then Caesar would understand what he'd done. Grant Thomas pulled out his phone and started making calls. He had resources they didn't know about, skills they couldn't imagine. And most importantly, he had something they'd underestimated: patience. Delta Force had taught him that the best operations weren't the fastest. They were the most thorough. Caesar Gaines had made this personal when he attacked Wilson. Now Grant would show him what personal really meant. Chapter 4. Building the Case. Grant's first call went to a man he'd worked with on 3 classified operations. Leonard Ryan, now a criminal investigator with Homeland Security Investigations. They'd extracted a diplomat together in Somalia 2 years ago, and Leonard owed him his life. Grant Thomas, Leonard answered on the second ring, his voice warm. To what do I owe the pleasure? I need information on a trafficking network operating in Portland. Off the books. The warmth vanished, replaced by professional focus. Talk to me. Grant laid it out. Roy Gaines, the restaurants, the workers, the connections to Raphael Harrington. Then he explained about Wilson. Leonard was quiet for a moment. Harrington's been on our radar for 3 years. We've never been able to build a case. Witnesses disappear. Evidence goes missing. Local PD stonewalls us. If Gaines is connected to him, that's huge. But Grant, if this is about your father, it's about shutting down a trafficking ring. That my father happened to discover it is just. Motivation. Aha. Leonard didn't sound convinced. What do you need? Access to your files on Harrington. Any surveillance, wire intercepts, financial records. And I need to know which local cops are clean. I can get you the files. As for clean cops, there's a detective, Lori Dyer, organized crime unit. She's been trying to investigate Gaines for 2 years, but keeps getting shut down. Her partner, Travis Hammond, is solid too. Everyone else in Portland PD either works for Gaines or is too scared to cross him. Can you set up a meeting with Dyer? I can. But Grant, whatever you're planning, stay legal. I can't protect you if you go cowboy on this. I'm just gathering information. Right. And I'm just a guy who believes you. Leonard sighed. I'll send the files encrypted. Meeting with Dyer is tomorrow, 1,400 hours, at a coffee shop called Riverside. Come alone. Grant spent the next morning visiting Wilson at the hospital. His father remained unconscious, but the doctors were cautiously optimistic about reducing the coma medication soon. Marshall reported that hospital security had logged 2 visits from someone claiming to be family, a man matching Caesar's description. They didn't let him in, Marshall said. I put your name and mine on the exclusive visitor list. But it shows they're paying attention. Good. Let them wonder what I'm doing. Grant also finally called Diane back. They met for lunch at a neutral restaurant, and the conversation was painful. I spoke to Caesar, she said immediately, her eyes red from crying. Grant, he's devastated. He said it all happened so fast. Dad was yelling, getting aggressive, and Caesar just reacted. Diane, stop. Grant kept his voice gentle, but firm. I love you, but I need you to hear this. Marshall saw everything. 15 other people saw it. Your cousin beat my father with a wine bottle while he was on the ground. That's not self-defense. That's attempted murder. The police said. The police are corrupt. The detective who responded works for your uncle. Diane's face hardened. You're talking about my family. And that man in the hospital fighting for his life is mine. They sat in terrible silence. Finally, Diane said quietly, What are you going to do? Whatever it takes to see justice done. That sounds like a threat. It's a promise. She stood, tears streaming. I can't be in the middle of this. My family says you're going to start a war. That you're dangerous. Your family attacked an unarmed 68-year-old man. You tell me who's dangerous. She left without another word. Grant sat alone, feeling the weight of it. His marriage might not survive this, but some things mattered more than personal happiness. His father had taught him that. At 1,400 hours, Grant entered Riverside Coffee. Detective Lori Dyer was already there, a sharp-eyed woman in her early 40s with short red hair and the wary posture of someone who'd learned not to trust easily. Her partner, Travis Hammond, sat beside her, a black man in his 30s with the build of an ex-athlete. Grant Thomas? Dyer asked as he approached. Thank you for meeting me. Leonard Ryan vouched for you. That counts for something. She gestured to a seat. He said you have information on Roy Gaines. Grant laid out everything Wilson's investigation. The attack, the trafficking connections. He provided copies of the documents Wilson had compiled, plus what he'd found from his own research. Dyer's expression grew grimmer with each page. This confirms what we've suspected for 2 years. But every time we try to build a case, it falls apart. Witnesses recant. Evidence disappears. Our warrant requests get denied by judges who suddenly develop conflicts of interest. How deep does Gaines' influence go? Grant asked. Travis spoke up. In Portland PD, we've identified at least 8 officers on his payroll, including Stan Shelton. 2 captains are compromised. The chief, we're not sure, but he's killed 3 investigations into Gaines' operations. What about outside Portland? State police? FBI? Dyer leaned forward. FBI won't touch it without local cooperation, which we can't provide without tipping off Gaines. State police are stretched thin. We're effectively alone on this. Then let's build a case they can't ignore. Grant said, I have resources, access to surveillance equipment, technical expertise, and I can go places you can't without warrants. Dyer's eyes narrowed. I'm a cop, Mr. Thomas. I can't be party to illegal activity. I'm not asking you to be. I'm offering to gather intelligence that might point you toward legal avenues of investigation. You develop your own probable cause. I just provide direction. Travis and Dyer exchanged looks. Finally, Dyer said, What's your goal here? Justice for your father or revenge? Both, Grant said honestly. But I want these people in prison for life, not just hurt. I want their network destroyed. And I want every single person they've trafficked freed. Dyer studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Okay? Here's how this works. You bring me information. I verify it through legal channels. Anything you obtain illegally, I never saw. Clear? Crystal. And Mr. Thomas? I'm sorry about your father. But if you step over the line, if you hurt someone, intimidate witnesses, anything that compromises our eventual prosecution, I will arrest you myself. Understood. They spent the next hour coordinating. Dyer provided locations of Gaines's businesses, known associates, and patterns of operation. Grant absorbed it all, his mind already forming operational plans. As they were leaving, Travis pulled him aside. My brother was homeless for 3 years. Gaines people recruited him to work in a warehouse. He disappeared 6 months ago. We think they either killed him or shipped him overseas when he tried to leave. Grant met his eyes. I'll find out what happened to him. I believe you will, Travis said. Just don't get yourself killed doing it. Chapter 5. Into the Shadows. Grant spent the next week conducting surveillance. He rented an apartment across from Cesar's condo and another near Roy's primary restaurant, a high-end Vietnamese place called Lotus Garden. He used techniques learned from a career in special operations, pattern of life analysis, technical surveillance, social engineering. What he found was both predictable and damning. Cesar followed the same routine. Sleep until noon, gym for 2 hours, then drinks at various bars where he ran errands. For Uncle Roy, collecting envelopes, intimidating people, occasionally beating someone in an alley behind the bar. No subtlety, no caution. He believed he was untouchable. Roy was more careful. He never touched anything illegal directly. His restaurants were legitimate businesses on the surface. But Grant watched the pattern. Every Thursday, unmarked vans arrived at Lotus Garden's loading dock at 0200 hours. Workers were unloaded, always Vietnamese, always scared, always under guard. They disappeared into the restaurant. Grant photographed everything with telephoto lenses. He tracked the vans back to a warehouse in an industrial area near the port, and one night, he broke in. The warehouse was listed as belonging to Pacific Northwest Logistics, a shell company buried under 3 layers of corporate ownership, but ultimately controlled by Roy Gaines. Inside, Grant found living quarters, cramped, filthy spaces where maybe 40 people were housed. Identity documents in a locked office. Ledgers recording debts and payments. He photographed it all, uploaded it to encrypted cloud storage, then left without a trace. But he also found something else: shipping manifests. The workers weren't just being held locally. Some were being sent to other cities, Seattle, San Francisco, even overseas. This was bigger than he'd realized. And in a corner office, he found Raphael Harrington's name on contracts with Pacific Northwest Logistics. Direct evidence of the connection. Grant was uploading the final photos when he heard voices. He tripped something, or someone was making a night check. Either way, his time was up. He moved silently through the warehouse, avoiding the two guards who entered. But as he reached the exit, one guard, a nervous kid named Eric Bauer, according to his ID badge, spotted him. "Hey, stop." Grant could have killed him. Should have, tactically. But Eric looked barely 20, scared and underpaid. Not a true believer, just a kid in over his head. Grant moved fast, disarmed him, put him in a control hold. "Listen carefully. You can walk away from this. These people you work for, they traffic human beings. That's life in federal prison. But if you're smart, you quit tomorrow and forget you saw me." I need this job," Eric stammered. "You need your freedom more. Trust me." Grant released him and disappeared into the night. Behind him, Eric sat on the ground, shaking. The next morning, Grant met with Dyer and Travis at a secure location a safe house Leonard had arranged. He handed over USB drives with all the evidence. Dyer's hands trembled as she reviewed it. This is enough for federal warrants. Multiple facilities, multiple victims, direct connections to Harrington. Grant, this is incredible. Can you move on it without tipping them off? Leonard's going to coordinate with the FBI. They'll hit all locations simultaneously: the restaurants, the warehouse, Harrington's operations in Seattle. But we need one more piece. Testimony from victims willing to talk. That's the hard part, Travis said. These people are terrified. They've been threatened, abused, told their families back home will be killed if they talk. Grant had expected this. "I know someone who might help. Tommy Weaver. He's a community advocate who's been trying to help trafficked workers for years." They tracked down Tommy at a community center in Portland's Jade District. He was a Vietnamese-American man in his 50s. Tired eyes, but fierce determination. When Grant explained the situation, Tommy's reaction was immediate. "I've been waiting for someone to take these bastards down for a decade. I have 3 families, 17 people total, who escaped from Gaines operations. They're hiding, terrified, but they might talk if they know it's real this time. That Gaines is actually going down. It's real," Grant promised. "But I need them safe first. Before any raids, before any arrests." Tommy thought for a moment. "I have a network. We can move them to safe locations out of state. But it'll take time and money." "How much money?" $20,000 to relocate them safely. New identities, transportation, housing deposits. Grant didn't hesitate. "Done. Set it up. I'll handle the costs." Over the next 3 days, Tommy coordinated an underground railroad of sorts, moving the families to safe houses in Idaho and Montana. Grant funded it all, draining his savings without regret. Each family, before they left, gave video testimony to Leonard Ryan and the FBI. Their stories were harrowing. Debts they couldn't repay, beatings, threats, women who'd been sexually assaulted by Cesar Gaines specifically, children who'd gone without medical care. Leonard compiled it all into a federal case that would bring down not just Roy and Cesar, but the entire trafficking network, including Raphael Harrington. "We're ready to move," Leonard told Grant on the phone. "Coordinated raids tomorrow at 0600. FBI, HSI, even DEA, since we found drug connections. This is going to be big." "Good," Grant said. "But I need something else." "What?" "I need to be there when they arrest Cesar." "Grant, that's not." "Leonard, I've given you everything. I've funded witness protection. I've risked my life getting evidence. I'm not asking to be part of the raid. I'm asking to watch from outside when they take him down. You owe me that." A long pause. Then, "Okay. But you stay in the car. You don't interfere. And if anyone asks, I don't know you're there. Deal?" Chapter 6. The Trap Springs. The raids happened at dawn. Grant sat in an unmarked car 2 blocks from Cesar's condo, watching through binoculars as FBI hostage rescue team members stacked up outside the door. The breach was textbook. Door ram, flashbang, team entry. 30 seconds later, they dragged Cesar out in handcuffs, wearing only boxer shorts, screaming about his rights. Grant watched with cold satisfaction. But this was just the beginning. Across the city, simultaneous raids hit Roy's restaurants. the warehouse, Roy's estate, and Harrington's Seattle operations. The coordination was beautiful, dozens of federal agents moving as one. No chance for evidence destruction or escape. Roy Gaines was arrested at his home, dragged out in front of his wife, Brenda, and their daughters. The look on his face, shock, rage, disbelief that his protection had failed was everything Grant had hoped for. But what happened next surprised everyone. As federal agents were processing the scene at Roy's estate, Diane showed up. Grant watched through the news coverage as she tried to reach her uncle, screaming at the FBI agents. And then critically, she made a phone call. Detective Lori Dyer, who was monitoring all communications, traced that call. Diane had called Stan Shelton, the corrupt detective, warning him that the feds are hitting everything. Grant's phone buzzed. Dyer's text, "Your wife just made herself an accessory," she warned Shelton. "We're moving to arrest her." Grant closed his eyes. He'd known it might come to this, but seeing it happen was different. He texted back, "Do what you have to do." 20 minutes later, Diane was in custody, charged with obstruction of justice. The operation netted 23 arrests total. Roy and Cesar Gaines. Raphael Harrington, 8 Portland police officers including Stan Shelton, and 12 others involved in the trafficking network. They freed 47 victims from the warehouse and various restaurant locations. The press conference that afternoon was massive. FBI, HSI, and Portland PD, represented by Chief Carlton Logan, who looked sick as he realized how deep the corruption went, announced the takedown of one of the largest human trafficking operations in the Pacific Northwest. They credited an anonymous tipster and months of investigation. Grant watched it on TV from his hotel room. Wilson remained in a coma, but the doctors said they'd begin waking him tomorrow. His phone rang. It was Diane, calling from jail. "Grant, please. I didn't know what I was doing. I panicked when I saw them arresting Uncle Roy. Please, you have to help me." "Help you?" Grant's voice was ice. "You called a corrupt cop to warn him about a federal raid. You chose your family over justice. He's my uncle. What was I supposed to do? You were supposed to trust that the law would handle it. Instead, you tried to protect a man who runs a trafficking ring, who ordered my father beaten, whose nephew nearly killed him. I didn't know about any of that. You knew enough. You knew Cesar attacked Dad. You knew something was wrong, but you chose them." Silence. Then, quietly, "So this is it? You're just done with me?" Grant thought about the woman he'd married. The nurse with the warm smile. But that woman had chosen blood over right. Had chosen corruption over justice. "I'm done enabling your family. What you do now is up to you. Cooperate with the feds, tell them everything you know, and maybe you'll avoid prison. Or stay loyal to Roy and Cesar, and spend the next decade behind bars with them. Your choice." He hung up. The next morning, Grant was at the hospital when Wilson's doctors began reducing the coma medications. Marshall stood beside him as the monitors showed Wilson's brain activity increasing. "Come on, Dad," Grant whispered. "Fight your way back." Wilson's eyes fluttered, opened. Confusion clouded his face, then recognition as he saw Grant. "Son?" His voice was weak, slurred from the brain injury. "I'm here, Dad. You're safe. Cesar. He attacked me. I know. It's over now. He's in federal custody. So is Roy. The whole network is shut down." Wilson's eyes sharpened despite the injury. "You did this?" "I did what you taught me. I stood for something." A tear rolled down Wilson's cheek. "Proud of you." The doctors confirmed that while Wilson would need months of physical therapy, his cognitive functions appeared intact. The damage wasn't as severe as feared. He'd walk again, talk again, be himself again. That afternoon, Leonard Ryan came to the hospital with an update. "Cesar's claiming he wants to cooperate," Leonard said. "His lawyer is offering testimony against Roy and Harrington in exchange for a plea deal." "No deal," Grant said immediately. "Grant, that's not your call." "I know, but I'm asking you. Make sure the prosecutors know what he did. Make sure they see the medical reports, the witness testimony, everything. Cesar beat my father nearly to death." "No deals." Leonard looked at Wilson, still weak in the hospital bed, then back at Grant. "I'll make sure they know." 3 days later, Cesar's lawyer withdrew the cooperation offer. The evidence against him was too overwhelming. and the prosecutors weren't interested in a deal anyway. Between the assault on Wilson and testimony from trafficking victims about his sexual assaults, Cesar was looking at multiple life sentences. Roy Gaines, facing similar charges, tried to use his money and influence one last time. His lawyers filed motions, made calls, tried to pressure witnesses, but Grant had one more card to play. He'd given Detective Dyer everything except one piece of evidence. A recording he'd made of Cesar bragging to friends at a bar about teaching that old man a lesson. Talking about how he'd cracked his skull open and how Uncle Roy said it was necessary. Grant had held it back, waiting for the right moment. When Roy's lawyers started playing games, Grant released it to Dyer, who released it to the media. The recording went viral. Public outrage was instant and massive. Roy's lawyers stopped returning calls. His wife Brenda filed for divorce and cooperated with prosecutors to save herself. The trap was complete. Chapter 7. Judgment. The trial began 4 months later. Wilson had recovered enough to attend, walking with a cane but present. Grant sat beside him every day, watching as the prosecution systematically destroyed any pretense of innocence. The assault charge against Cesar was prosecuted first, separately from the trafficking charges. The DA wanted to make sure justice for Wilson wasn't lost in the larger federal case. Marshall Miller testified about what he'd witnessed at the dinner. 15 other guests confirmed the story. Wilson had asked questions. Cesar had attacked him without provocation, beating him repeatedly with a wine bottle. The defense tried to claim diminished capacity. Cesar had been drunk, hadn't meant to cause such harm. The prosecutor destroyed that argument with the bar recording, where a sober Cesar bragged about the attack days later. The medical evidence was damning. Dr. Ernest Pope, the neurosurgeon who'd operated on Wilson, testified about the severity of the injuries. 3 separate impacts to the skull with sufficient force to fracture bone and cause brain bleeds. These weren't defensive strikes. These were intended to kill or cause permanent damage. Cesar sat at the defense table, no longer arrogant. His expensive lawyers had abandoned him for clients who could actually pay. His court-appointed attorney did her best. But there was no defense for what the evidence showed. The jury deliberated for 90 minutes. Guilty on all counts. Attempted murder, aggravated assault, assault with a deadly weapon. When the verdict was read, Cesar's face crumpled. He looked at Grant across the courtroom. Grant held his gaze, expression neutral, until Cesar looked away. Sentencing came 2 weeks later. The judge, a no-nonsense woman named Joyce Nicholson, didn't mince words. Mr. Gaines, you attacked an unarmed 68-year-old man in a fit of rage, caused traumatic brain injury that will affect him for the rest of his life, and then attempted to escape justice by lying to police. Your actions were cowardly, brutal, and premeditated. The only reason you're not facing murder charges is medical intervention, not any mercy on your part. She sentenced him to 25 years to life, with no possibility of parole for 20 years. Cesar was led away in shackles. As he passed Grant, he hissed, "This isn't over." Grant leaned close enough that only Cesar could hear. "Yes, it is. You'll be 74, before you're even eligible for parole. And the federal trafficking charges are still coming. You're done." The federal trial began 6 weeks later. Roy Gaines, Raphael Harrington, and the corrupt police officers were tried together. The evidence was overwhelming. Testimony from 47 freed victims. Financial records, surveillance footage, the documents Wilson had compiled, and everything Grant had photographed at the warehouse. Tommy Weaver sat with the victim families every day, translating when needed, providing support. Many of them testified, brave men and women who'd been enslaved, describing the horror of what Roy's operation had done to them. Roy's defense was that he'd known nothing about the trafficking, that subordinates had acted without his knowledge. The prosecutor demolished this with phone records, text, and testimony from Roy's former employees who'd flipped to save themselves. The evidence Grant had gathered, the warehouse photos, the shipping manifests, the financial records, was the backbone of the prosecution's case. Detective Dyer had carefully discovered it all through anonymous tips and parallel investigation. Raphael Harrington tried to make a deal, offering testimony against Roy, but the prosecutors had everything they needed. His deal was rejected. The trial lasted 8 weeks. The jury deliberated for 3 days. All defendants guilty on all counts. Roy Gaines, convicted of human trafficking, conspiracy, money laundering, and racketeering, was sentenced to 40 years in federal prison. At 56, he'd die behind bars. Raphael Harrington received 35 years. Stan Shelton and the other corrupt cops received sentences ranging from 10 to 20 years. Their police pensions were forfeit. But there was one more piece Grant needed to see finished. Diane had taken a plea deal, agreeing to testify about the Gaines family's operations in exchange for a reduced sentence. Her cooperation had been minimal. She genuinely hadn't known much about the trafficking, but her obstruction charge was serious. She was sentenced to 2 years in federal prison, eligible for release after 18 months with good behavior. Grant attended her sentencing. They hadn't spoken since his last phone call. When she saw him in the courtroom, her eyes filled with tears. After the judge pronounced sentence, Diane's lawyer arranged for them to speak briefly in a court conference room under guard supervision. "I'm sorry," she said immediately. "Grant, I'm so sorry. I didn't understand. I didn't know." "You didn't want to know," Grant said quietly. "Your family showed you who they were, and you chose not to see it. My uncle, he helped raise me after my parents died. I couldn't believe he was capable of. He trafficked human beings, Diane. He ordered my father beaten. And you called a corrupt cop to warn him when the feds came. You made your choice." She was crying openly now. "Is there any chance? When I get out, could we try again?" Grant looked at the woman he'd loved. Part of him still did, but trust, once broken, was almost impossible to rebuild. "I don't know," he said honestly. "Focus on your time, on getting through this. We can talk when you're out. But Diane, I can't promise anything. I understand." She wiped her eyes. "Your father, is he okay?" "He's recovering. Learning to walk without a cane now. His speech is almost back to normal. Tell him I'm sorry. Please." Grant nodded and left. Chapter 8. Aftermath. 6 months after the trials, Grant stood in his father's workshop in Montana. Wilson was building a birdhouse, his hands steady, his movements careful but confident. "Hand me that sandpaper," Wilson said. And Grant complied. They worked in comfortable silence for a while, the rhythm familiar from Grant's childhood. Then Wilson spoke. "You destroyed them. Completely. They destroyed themselves. I just made sure the world saw it. That recording you made of Caesar, that was the final nail." Grant had told Wilson about all of it eventually. The surveillance, the warehouse break-in, everything. Wilson had listened without judgment. "You could have killed him," Wilson said quietly. "Caesar, Roy, any of them. You certainly had the skills. That would have made me like them," Grant said. "And it wouldn't have freed the people they'd enslaved. This way, justice was served. The victims got their lives back. And those men will die in prison." Wilson set down his tools and looked at his son. "I'm proud of you. Not because you won, but because you did it the right way. You stood for something bigger than revenge. You taught me that. I taught you a lot of things. But you chose which lessons to keep." Wilson gripped Grant's shoulder. "Thank you for saving my life, and for finishing what I started." They embraced. Two men who understood that justice and revenge weren't opposites. They were sometimes the same thing, depending on who sought it and how. Later that evening, Grant received a call from Travis Hammond. "We found my brother," Travis said, his voice thick with emotion, "in one of the shipping containers that Harrington was using. He'd been sent to a warehouse in Malaysia. The International Task Force located him. He's alive, Grant. Traumatized, sick, but alive. He's coming home." "That's great news, Travis. It's because of you. Because you brought them down. There were 17 other people in that container, all alive because you acted fast enough." After the call, Grant sat on Wilson's porch, watching the Montana sunset. His phone had messages from Leonard Ryan, Tommy Weaver, Detective Dyer, all sharing updates on the victims they'd freed and the lives being rebuilt. 47 people directly freed from the warehouse and restaurants. 63 more identified through the investigation and liberated from other locations. Over 100 human beings given their freedom back. That was what mattered. Not the personal victory over Caesar and Roy. Satisfying as that was. But the lives saved. His phone buzzed again. A text from Diane. "I know you probably won't respond, but I wanted you to know. I testified today about Uncle Roy's business practices. Help them recover more hidden assets. They're using the money for victim compensation. I'm trying to do better. Grant stared at the message for a long time. Then he typed back, "That's good. Keep doing better." It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reconciliation, but it was acknowledgement that people could change, could choose differently when they finally saw clearly. Maybe someday they'd talk again. Maybe not. Grant was content leaving that door neither open nor closed, just unlocked. Chapter 9. Forward. 1 year later, Grant stood in a community center in Portland's Jade District. Tommy Weaver had organized a gathering for the survivors of the Gaines trafficking operation, and many had returned to Portland to participate. Grant hadn't wanted to come. He'd done his part, moved on. He was working as a military contractor now, still using his skills, but on his own terms. Wilson was fully recovered, building bridges again, consulting on projects across the Northwest. But Tommy had insisted, and Leonard had convinced him. "These people want to thank you," Leonard had said. "Let them." So Grant came. The room was filled with Vietnamese families, many of whom he recognized from the photographs and testimony. Children played in corners. Adults talked in small groups, the trauma of their experiences still visible but healing with time. Tommy introduced Grant simply. "This is the man who helped free you." The response was overwhelming. People approached to shake his hand, to hug him, to say thank you in broken English and Vietnamese. A woman named Sophia Nguyen, who testified about being assaulted by Cesar, brought her young daughter. "Because of you, she has a future," Sophia said through tears. "Thank you." An elderly man named Mitchell Fisher, who'd been held in the warehouse for 2 years, grasped Grant's hand with surprising strength. "You are a good man. You fight for people you don't know. That is true courage." Grant felt something shift inside him. He'd done what he needed to do. Protected his father, sought justice, dismantled a criminal network. But he'd thought of it in tactical terms. Mission accomplished, enemies neutralized, seeing the actual human impact, the children who would grow up free, the families reunited, that was different. That was real. Later, as the gathering was winding down, Detective Lori Dyer approached him. "You going to make a habit of this?" she asked with a slight smile. "Taking down trafficking rings? I wasn't planning on it." "That's too bad. We could use someone with your skills. There are a lot of Roy Gaines out there. A lot of people who need help." Grant considered it. He'd spent a decade fighting America's enemies abroad. But there were enemies here too, predators who hid behind money and influence, who hurt the vulnerable because they believed they were untouchable. "I'll think about it," he said. Dyer handed him her card. "When you're done thinking, call me. I've got at least 5 cases that could use your particular expertise." That night, Grant drove back to Montana. He kept the extended stay apartment in Portland, occasionally used it when consulting on projects in the area. But Montana was home now, being near Wilson, rebuilding the bond that Cesar had nearly shattered. He pulled into Wilson's driveway around midnight. Lights were still on in the workshop. Grant walked in to find his father at the drafting table, working on bridge plans. "Thought you'd be asleep," Grant said. "Couldn't sleep. Thinking about that bridge project in Seattle. They want me to consult on the seismic reinforcement." Wilson looked up. "How was the gathering?" "Emotional. Good. The people we freed, they're building new lives. Some are going to college. Some started businesses. They're healing." Wilson nodded. "That's what justice looks like. Not just punishment for the guilty, but restoration for the victims." "Dyer wants me to help with more cases. Trafficking, corruption, organized crime." "What did you tell her?" "That I'd think about it." Wilson studied his son. "You know what I think? I think you found something in that fight. Something beyond just defending your family. You found purpose." Grant sat down, considering. "I spent 10 years fighting terrorists overseas. But this shutting down Gaines, freeing those people, it felt more real. More meaningful. Because you saw the faces of the people you saved. You heard their stories. That changes everything." Wilson set down his pencil. "Whatever you decide, I'm proud of you. But I think you already know what you're going to do." Grant smiled slightly. "Yeah, I probably do." The next morning, Grant called Lori Dyer. "I'm in," he said. "But I have conditions. I work independently. I choose which cases. And I do things my way. As long as your way eventually leads to legal prosecutions, we have a deal." Dyer's voice carried satisfaction. "Welcome to the team. I've got a case in Seattle, a labor trafficking ring using construction companies. Interested?" Send me the details. One more thing, Dyer said. The Victims' Compensation Fund from seized Gaines assets. It topped $3 million. That money is going to help rebuild lives for decades. You did that. After the call ended, Grant walked out to his father's property, looking at the Montana mountains. Wilson found him there an hour later. So, Wilson asked, I'm going to keep fighting. Different battlefield. Same war. Protecting people who can't protect themselves. Wilson put his arm around his son's shoulders. That's what I raised you for. Not to be a warrior, to be a protector. They stood together, father and son, both scarred but unbroken. Cesar Gaines had attacked Wilson Thomas, thinking he was just an old man who'd asked too many questions. Roy Gaines had believed his money and influence made him untouchable. They'd both learned the same lesson. Actions have consequences. And Grant Thomas had taught them that lesson thoroughly. Cesar would spend the next 2 decades minimum in prison, likely dying there. Roy would never see freedom again. Their network was destroyed, their money seized, their influence obliterated. But more importantly, over 100 people were free because Grant had refused to accept the injustice done to his father, because he'd channeled his rage into purpose, his skills into justice. Come on, Wilson said. I'm making breakfast. Then you can tell me about this Seattle case. They walked back to the house together, ready for whatever came next. Because that's what men like Wilson and Grant Thomas did. They built things. Bridges, lives, justice. And when necessary, they tore down those who preyed on the innocent. The Gaines family had learned that lesson too late. But the people they'd enslaved, the lives they'd destroyed, those people, had learned something too. That sometimes, the good guys win. And when they do, they win completely.
This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your precious time. If you enjoyed this story, then please make sure you subscribe to this channel. That would help me a lot. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.